What's up, everybody? We're back at it here. Happy Monday, everybody. It's another week, another trial completed. And as we usually do post trial, we try to see if there are any interviews, see if we can learn anything from the parties involved, whether it's the lawyers, whether it's the actual parties, on how they feel now that a verdict has been reached. If they get juror interviews, we will try to watch those and react and see what we can learn from the trial, from our thoughts, watching from the outside, guessing or expecting what the lawyers or jurors or parties may do, giving our evaluations, myself, you all in the chat. It's fun sometimes to look back and reflect on it and see when justice is served, how the parties react, how they feel. We saw some comments made by the defense lawyers. We saw some comments made by the plaintiff's lawyers. Today, we are going to start the video with some words and reactions from Maya herself. How does she feel now that we saw a little bit of it. I think it was only like 30 seconds last time. This one's a little bit longer with Chris Cuomo on News Nation. And she gives us a little insight onto what this meant to her, the money, but also just the yes or no and what meant more and what her mom may think and things like that. And then we're also going to get her reaction from one of her other lawyers, Nick Whitney. I believe we heard from Mr. Anderson before. And we're going to see what they have to say about the trial, what his insights are, how he feels about Johns Hopkins, what he thinks they proved. So it's going to be interesting to get both of those perspectives today on about a 5-minute interview. And then the major question I've gotten since this verdict is, why aren't there criminal charges? This stuff was so bad. What they did to Maya, how come there are not criminal charges? So after this interview, the second one we're going to listen to is Mr. Anderson again, discussing a criminal complaint filed by Maya. But it's not necessarily for the same things we already heard about at trial. And it's not necessarily the same allegations a lot of you were asking about in the messages, but some of you were. And we did hear some about these allegations, but they never came out in the civil trial. So we're going to get to exactly what they filed the criminal complaint about and who would the defendant be? How do you file charges against a corporation or a hospital? What does that look like? Can it be both? Is it an individual? Is it a hospital? Which individual is it? We're going to talk about all that and more on today's episode. So hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to our page, hit that reminder bell so you can be a part of what trial and cases we cover next, now that this one is coming to a close. But let's get to Maya. Let's hear what she has to say about this verdict and her lawyer, Mr. Whitney.
Counselor, Maya, I'm very sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances, but we are very satisfied with giving you a platform to tell the story. First, how are you doing? How are you handling the events, the notoriety? How is your health?
Emotionally, I would say I'm doing great right now. It feels really nice to finally have an answer to this court case. Unfortunately, my health is still not the best. CRPS is a chronic illness, and I will be dealing with it for the rest of my life. But every day, I will push forward.
So what's really interesting about this is, like, mentally, she says she's doing way better, and you can just imagine the weight that's off her shoulder, not just with vindication and justice and knowing that she was right, but also just to have all this behind her. The constant pictures and people following you to see if you're going to, not act like you have CRPS and things like that were coming out during the trial, the pressure of this case, people saying, she's just after the money, which that will probably still happen. But all of that pressure on her, a huge weight has been lifted off her shoulders now that the court case has come to an end, at least the trial process. Now there's going to be the appellate process, but she's got to feel a lot better mentally. So I'm happy to hear that. But physically, as we've learned throughout the trial, and as so many of you have commented in the chat that are dealing with CRPS, that has not gone away. It's a chronic illness. It's probably never going to go away. That's why they argue a life care plan, because you're going to need a lifetime of medical treatment to deal with the things psychologically and physically that has happened to you as a result of this case. And many civil clients have the same kind of burden to prove.
And what does this mean for your family? I know a lot of people are making a big deal about the number. It's a big number, but it doesn't mean the same thing to you, because there is no replacing a mother with a monetary number. So how do you process this?
You're absolutely right. No amount of money would ever replace my mom. So honestly, we were just happy to get a yes. We were happy to have our prayers answered.
and to say that you were right. I got it. Now,
it's always interesting because clients, sometimes they're lay people just like the jury, and it's hard to understand, like, yes, the money's not going to bring her mother back. She's not going to feel good now that this happened, or it wasn't worth it, but it's the only option we have in civil court. And that's what we always have to explain to a jury to get them to understand. And sometimes clients, same way, no amount of money makes a client happy in a lot of our cases. And that's just how it works because you were damaged so severely.
Counselor, just to give some shape for people's understanding of this, what did the hospital do wrong?
The hospital, although they had the ability to report child abuse, once Maya was in their custody, they failed to protect her from inside abusers. And there were social workers in particular that took advantage of Maya's vulnerability. They decided that her disease was a charade. They told her that her mother had a mental illness. They interfered with phone calls. They did everything they could to victimize this girl inside that hospital over those 3 months.
So interesting. So he says, they hurt her. A lot of it was intentional abusers in the hospital, social workers, interference, things like that. Not a lot of talk about the medicine and medical malpractice and how they misdiagnosed her and things like that. Now, that is a part of it. But the main issue, the heart of this issue, was how the hospital treated her as a person, not even as a patient, and how they treated her mother and how they interfered in their lives and called them liars, basically, and victimized them from within. That was the main point that he wanted to drive home in this interview, and that I felt like carried the day at trial more than, they were treating her with physical therapy and not with pills or not with ketamine or whatever. That is not the main focus of what happened in this case, which is why it's more of the actual wrongdoing here, not a just an overall, medical problem, but more a personal problem and a culture and corporate and systematic problem.
So if they thought it was fake, does that mean that they didn't even treat her all during the time?
Unbelievably, the hospital never decided what their diagnosis of Maya was. They bounced between psychosomatic issues. You mentioned factitious disorder. Sometimes they thought it was conversion disorder. Some of the doctors that testified thought it was CRPS, then it wasn't. But they never treated her consistently for any singular condition. And worse, they had no complex regional pain syndrome experts in-house, nor did they consult any.
Hey, Maya, what do you think this would mean to your mom?
I'm sorry, it was a little muffled. Do you mind repeating the question?
What do you think this turn of events, of winning the case, of getting this kind of award, what do you think it would mean to your mom?
I honestly think it means everything to her. My mom was the type of person, when she was right, she was going to prove it. Unfortunately, she's not here to carry that out, but we are here and we carried it out and we proved her right.
What is your big dream for your life?
I'm not exactly sure yet, but I know that my mom, she gave her life so I could have one. So I'm going to focus on all the positives instead of the negatives attached to my disease. I want to redirect my energy into moving forward. So focusing on physical therapy, my CRPS doctors, and also happiness, building relationships with friends and family.
So there's no greater sacrifice, right, than to lay down one's life, regardless of if we want that to happen or hope that happens. We would never hope that to happen. We would never want somebody to make that decision. We would always think that there would be a better decision, but that is what her mom did and why she did it. That's what Maya feels like, why her mom did it. That's what the jury felt like as well, that there was no other option. She was pushed to this. This was the only way she could save her daughter. And that's how the case came out. A lot of people asking, do we think this is going to set a precedent for blaming the taking of one's life on other people or on certain things? I would say no, I don't think so. But this is kind of, we had the other case of the girl who was texting her boyfriend who wanted to do this to himself, and she basically encouraged it, told him to do it, and she was convicted criminally of that. So I think words are important, as we've talked about. Actions are important. But, I know there's people on this channel that struggle with this and struggle with mental health issues and doubt and feeling down about themselves. And I think our job just as a society is to always encourage people that there is a better way, there is a different way. And you know, I truly believe that there's always a way to save a life without having to take a life. And I think there's a lot of different situations that can happen. This happened in this case, and we're being reactionary and dealing with it after the fact. But you know, my position will always be, I would hope that we can encourage people and show them there's a reason to live, and life would be better if you were here. And so that's what I'll stand by. But it doesn't change the facts and circumstances in this case and how the outcome has resolved in the jury's verdict, and based on what they were presented with, how this case went down the road, and we'll see kind of what happens in future cases based on this. So Maya is satisfied, even happy with the verdict and to get the answer, but she's not out celebrating spending $100 million because they haven't gotten it yet. There will be appeals. We've discussed this at length in other videos, but the focus of the second half of the video is going to be on criminal action, criminal complaints, how and who or what is going to be charged with a crime. And we're going to dig into that now and talk about how it could affect the appellate process, how it can affect Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, how it may affect the verdict, and why certain charges and not others. So let's get to that now.
Be out of legal trouble just yet. The Kowalskis are now filing a criminal complaint for sexual assault. The issue came up very early in the civil trial when their attorney, Gregory Anderson, addressed it outside the presence of the jury.
I said, Maya, we're going to dismiss Ms. Beatty. Now, are you telling me every single encounter you had there? I need to know every single encounter, no matter how big or small you think it is. And she told me one story about them dancing around her to try to get her to get out of bed and dance. And we know about this. Then she broke down, and then she told me that she had a doctor come in, and she figured it was a doctor because she described him as being tall, thin, glasses, I think she said round glasses, and dirty blonde hair. With a lab coat on, she could identify his belt and his pants. The doctor walked in, male, without chaperone or assistant. The doctor walked over to her and said, "May I take a peek?" The doctor pulled down Maya's pajamas, which was pretty late in the day. I know it was short shorts or pajamas, but it had a drawstring. Pulled them down, pulled her panties down, and then stared at her vagina for, Maya said, long enough for her to be not only startled, but start to cry. Whereupon he turned around, went to the door, turned over around his shoulder and said, "Thanks." She never saw him again. Now, as an officer of the court, I will swear everywhere, had I known anything about this, I would have immediately brought to the attention of both the court and to opposing counsel. I then waited. I've waited for the past 3 or 4 days, however long it's been, because I wanted to corroborate before I brought this before the court. So Maya was able to locate a witness where approximately 2 years, a little less than 2 years after it happened, she told a young man who was a friend of hers what happened, and he is willing to testify about it.
Now,
so seems like a doctor. We'll see if it might or might not be. Never saw him again after it happened. And she told a friend, not contemporaneously, but years ago, only 3 years after it happened. And now we're 7+ years or whatever later. So that's some corroboration. He wanted to let him know as soon as possible. We heard this happen during the trial. It didn't come out at trial. Judge didn't allow it for a bunch of different reasons. It was probably correct to do so, but that doesn't mean it's over. It obviously didn't affect the verdict or anything in the case.
the defense argued the plaintiffs could not add that claim.
I should say it probably didn't have much of an effect. I shouldn't say we know that it didn't have an effect. Maybe it would have been even higher, but they didn't lose the case because of that information was not allowed in.
to the civil trial because it would require a motion to change the complaints and could push the trial back another year. Ultimately, the judge decided not to allow it in this case. All right, joining me now to talk about this huge development is the Kowalski family's attorney, Gregory Anderson. Gregory, thank you so much for joining us. First and foremost, I want to congratulate you on your historic verdict. Number one, I don't think there's very few people in the world who know how much work it takes for a case like that. And I would imagine last night might have been the first night in a long time you got a decent night's sleep. So I think that's fair. So I want to know how you and the family are doing now, a day removed from yesterday's historic verdict.
How we're doing now, I think there's a great sense of relief. I have a great sense of wanting more sleep is my concern. I've been operating on about 3 or 4 hours of sleep for the past 9 weeks. So I'm a little blurry-eyed, I apologize. The Kowalskis are doing very, very well. I had lunch with them today. They're in good spirits. They are very positive about the result. This was an unbelievably emotional event, but they're kids and they have a great ability to recover, far more than mine, I would say, far more than Jack's. So the Kowalskis are doing well, and we talked extensively about the future and some efforts to try to put their lives back together.
All right, so let's move now to this new development. I don't want to call it stunning because there was some inclination that this happened and was very damaging to this 10-year-old girl when it happened. So tell me about this criminal complaint, where it stands, and the decision to bring it.
Right. Well, I can tell everyone that today, Maya Kowalski went to the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department with my partner, Nick Whitney, swore out a criminal complaint against Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital with the idea, though, and I want to make this clear, that we have not been able to identify a specific perpetrator there. We do not know if this is a Johns Hopkins physician, though obviously from the description that Maya's given, that seems to be the most obvious. But it could very well have been somebody who snuck in there, managed to get a Johns Hopkins ID, lab coat, stethoscope, the indicia that it was a doctor, and perpetrate the crime. So
let's pause it there for a second. So one of the questions I asked off the top that a lot of people were asking is, who is the criminal defendant and how? So they filed a criminal complaint against Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. So that's number one. And an unknown perpetrator, it sounds like. So how does that work in the criminal world? Well, you can absolutely have a corporation that is a criminal defendant. The punishment is obviously not prison for the corporation, but it is stiff fines. It could be, people having to monitor their work or having some kind of regulation or even shut them down altogether as a corporation. But there are criminal repercussions for corporate criminal defendants. We've had a lot of corporate clients at our firm in the past. But there can also be an individual component to that. So if this is an individual doctor that works for Johns Hopkins, they can be a criminal defendant individually and the corporation for their acts as a corporation and the acts as the individual. Now, if it is somebody who, like he said, maybe snuck in, stole a lab coat, stole a stethoscope to look like a doctor, well, there could still be some culpability on Johns Hopkins for not preventing that, for allowing that, for making that stuff readily available, for not knowing who their doctors are, for not having a proper security system in place. And to me, it might be harder to get that to be a crime versus some kind of civil implication. But at this point, she has sworn and swore a criminal complaint. You're under oath and you swear that everything you're telling is the truth. And she has described the person in detail, his hair, his height, his weight, what he was wearing, what he did. So all of that is enough at this point. It doesn't mean there's going to be charges filed. It doesn't mean there's going to be charges prosecuted. It doesn't mean there's going to be a trial. It doesn't mean there's going to be a conviction. It just means the beginning part of a criminal complaint has happened, and it's happened against a corporation, which is very viable in Florida and every other state, and potentially against an unknown individual. So that's where we stand at this point. It's not Kathy Beatty. It's not Sally Smith. It's not any of the characters that we heard from or heard accusations against during the trial. So let's listen to a little bit more, and then we'll talk about specifically what crimes have been alleged and why.
It's important to understand that Maya swore out a complaint, but we cannot tell, and this is going to be up to the police, really, to the sheriff's office to come in and to conduct the investigation, make that determination.
All right. So what does it mean for the case going forward if you're not able to identify a specific individual? I don't imagine, at least in my experience, that you could bring this criminal case against, let's say, a hospital or a hospital administrator or someone else involved in the care of Maya. Or is that possible?
Well, that's a good point, Michael. It's so it would be a alternative allegation. On one hand, there will be counts, and we're drafting the complaint right now, and we hope to have it filed by the end of next week. On one hand, there will be an assault, battery, intentional infliction count against the hospital acting through an employee, physician, somebody employed there. In the alternative, there will be counts involving premises liability, negligent supervision, negligent security, all of the, and I hate to use the term usual because nothing about this case is proven to be usual, but the typical causes of action that you would have where a facility, be it a hospital or a hotel or wherever, failed to maintain the appropriate security and protection for the patrons, or in this case, the patients. So it'll be it'll be in the alternative is the best way to put it.
All right.
So that sounded like he's talking about a civil complaint. So they're going to file a civil complaint. She went and swore criminal charges. There absolutely can be criminal charges against the hospital. Does this factual scenario actually fit that? I don't think so. I think it's possible, but I don't think that this actually fits into a corporate crime unless, again, it was directed by like the board of directors and this was the corporate intention and things like that. Absolutely, there can be corporate criminal defendants. Will there be in this case? We don't know. But why? Why bring these criminal charges? Why file this additional civil complaint? You already got $260 million. Are they greedy? What's the reason for it? Well, my initial thought for the reason as to why you file this criminal complaint and these additional civil causes of action is it gives you just more leverage and pressure to get a settlement amount or to get them to pay the $260 million. I still don't think they're going to pay the $260 million, but this absolutely adds value. And, you know, we've heard all sorts of different things like they didn't make an offer. They did make an offer. It was only $1 million. It was only $1,000, whatever. Some nominal offer. This adds a ton of leverage and pressure because if they file these civil causes of action, I think Johns Hopkins kind of knows how a trial will go. It's not going to be good for them. They're probably going to lose, and it's probably going to be a lot of money. So as part of any settlement or deal that can come up post-verdict during the appellate process, probably is going to include waiver and dismissal with prejudice for these additional civil charges. So if they say, fine, we'll pay you $150 million, you waive your appeal, we waive our appeal. If they're going to appeal, they probably won't, but you waive all of your post-judgment proceedings and you dismiss these additional civil charges without prejudice. And you potentially tell law enforcement that, you know, you're not interested in going forward on a criminal complaint. It's up to them ultimately whether or not they go forward, but without the victim's involvement, it's a lot less likely. We've been over this in other cases, but all of that goes away with a settlement. Johns Hopkins can demand, you know, quote unquote, can ask for that. And this is just another arrow in the plaintiff's quiver. It's more leverage that they have now to push for a higher offer, settlement, resolution, payment of the verdict in full, whatever you want to say. This is a huge point of leverage. Now, why these criminal charges and not for battery and for false imprisonment? right? Because we've already seen that. We've already seen false imprisonment. We've already seen battery. We've already seen those allegations proven true to the greater weight of the evidence, and even for clear and convincing evidence, a higher burden than the normal civil burden, but not quite beyond a reasonable doubt. So why don't we go for those? Well, the statute of limitations for a simple battery is 2 years. In most scenarios, the statute of limitations for false imprisonment in most scenarios is 3 years. But for SA, or some kind of battery with a sexual element to it, which is what they're claiming here, in most scenarios in Florida, does not have a statute of limitations. So that is why these crimes can be charged all these years later, but battery and false imprisonment are probably not something that would ever happen based on the statute of limitations. So we're starting to understand why they're doing what they're doing as part of the criminal and civil process, and how the judicial system can run parallel a lot, and they can have a lot of effect on each other, especially the criminal process affecting the civil process, not as much the other way around.
Quickly, let me ask you this. I am a defense attorney by trade, so I think in these terms. I can imagine already if someone is identified, or even if the hospital, they would claim that something like this was what you do in circumstances where perhaps abuse is suspected, that you're looking for signs of abuse, and that's what this was, not to discount the way Maya.
Meaning there's a legitimate medical purpose for what this, so-called doctor came in and did to Maya to look at her private parts. It is possible, but at this point, all the leverage is with the plaintiff, and all the leverage is looking at that hospital as a bad guy. So I still think that would be an uphill battle and very difficult to get a jury to agree with all the other context of what we have.
Felt about it, but what would you say to that claim?
Well, in terms of signs of abuse, certainly.
This was not they were not abusing her or accusing her parents of that kind of abuse. First off, they were accusing her parents of, the conversion disorder, Munchausen's by proxy, giving her medication she didn't need, putting her in a coma, wanting her to act that way for whatever reason, to be relying on them or whatever. I don't know why you'd want your child to act that way, but that's what the abuse they were accusing her of. Psychological, maybe some physical, but not sexual.
What Maya described was overwhelming abuse apart from this, and then this adds to it. It's difficult with children. Remember, Maya was 10. So a 10-year-old has well documented that 10-year-olds children are going to suppress their feelings about such things. And so how Maya reacted at the time, we still have a lot to discover and to figure out. If the question is, and I want to make sure I'm identifying the question, if it is, how do we prove that? As to the premises liability aspect of it, I think just having the fact that somebody was able to get into it.
No, I think he was asking how to prove it as far as why is there not a legitimate medical purpose because of the allegations of abuse. Not necessarily how do you prove negligent security. Obviously, somebody should not be able to get in there and put a lab coat on and just walk in unattended to a little girl's room by herself and tell her to pull down her pants and then walk out and nobody's there to help her.
Children's Hospital, and remember, this was in the PICU, the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. So how did somebody manage to make it into the PICU without anyone noticing them? If it was in fact someone who was not a doctor or otherwise employed there, then a third-party assailant, as we say, how were they able to get there and get into Maya's room? An interesting point of this case, and if for those folks out there that were following the case just concluded, was there was a tremendous amount of testimony about the sequestration, if you will, of Maya away from other patients and becoming a, lack of a better term, a non-entity there during her stay, with no name up there, no identification outside her room. The other children had, names, identifiers outside, and everything from smiley faces to, cartoon characters, things like that. Maya was not treated that way. Maya was treated completely as a non-entity. And our question is this: doesn't this tend to attract the type of perpetrator we're talking about here? if this child has a, lack of a better term, reputation among the hospital staff as someone who can't be believed because of the allegations against her of factitious disorder, conversion disorder, doesn't that kind of set her up to be a target for a predator? And that's something that we're actively reviewing.
All right. Unbelievable. I mean, this is an unbelievable case that seems to have gotten even more unbelievable now. Gregory Anderson, again, I want to thank you for joining us. And
So that's the end. And again, to swear a complaint against Johns Hopkins, which is how he phrased it to start, and then an unknown perpetrator, mostly corporate criminal activity and liability comes when like a member of the board acts in furtherance of the corporation for some benefit of the corporation, antitrust violation, almost always white collar, not an individual doctor committing a crime. It'd be very hard to get that corporate liability onto the hospital. But of course, putting their name in the criminal complaint, adding another civil complaint, adds a lot of leverage and negativity toward the hospital. The bad publicity just continues. They're keeping the pressure on. They're keeping the pedal to the metal, their foot on the throat, the fire hot, whatever analogy you want to use. They are keeping it turned all the way up against Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital at this point. And I think it will potentially further a bigger settlement if one should come, or Johns Hopkins can just continue to do what they're doing, appeal the case, ignore it, diminish it, deny it, say they did nothing wrong, and that wouldn't surprise me either. So let me know what you guys think. Is criminal action appropriate for Johns Hopkins? Is it appropriate for this unknown perpetrator? Are you surprised it's not any of the claims for battery, for false imprisonment, things like that? Let me know. What do you want to know in the comments? Anything left to discuss on this case? I'm happy to answer those questions. I appreciate you guys joining me as always. It's always a good time when you get in here and get in the chat and we can talk through these issues together, learn something new, some more post-verdict information. So I appreciate you joining me. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast featuring new episodes every week. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.